Welcome to Igniting Change, the podcast where we explore innovation, industry trends, and how tech for good is solving the world's biggest challenges. Let's get into it.
Addie, thank you so much for joining us. Did you want to intro yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, Puff. Super excited to be here. I'm Addie Achan, and I am really passionate about the AI and impact space, the intersection of how that results in. Currently, I am the founder of Impacts AI. It's a firm that helps philanthropies and impact investors understand how to really make like the best types of AI funding decisions in ways that are like safe and future looking, cost effective, all those important aspects. And yeah, I'm just a lifelong technologist and who has a very big passion for like, I don't know, my love in life is just helping people. So that's sort of how I ended up here.
Well, yeah, I mean, you say that's just how I ended up with Ash, but like you founded a company. Like, talk to me about that. What's the journey that you've been on to get to where
Yeah. I mean, if it's okay, I might start at the very, very beginning because I think it's a big intersection between like my personal life and like, you know, my professional skills. So quite literally, like, you know, the very beginning, I was born in India, but when I was a baby, I moved to Utah, which, you know, if some listeners may not know, it's a state in the US that's basically like the complete opposite of India. It's like, you know, a place that's very like white, conservative. There's a big religious influence, all that stuff. And I think from a very early age, I had that feeling of otherness. You know, obviously being Indian myself, I was also like a chubby kid, all that stuff. So I think it always instilled in me like this feeling of like desiring fairness and justice and equitable treatment. And maybe I didn't have that language necessarily at the time, but it's my earliest memories are even like centered around that. At the same time, I was a bit of a nerd. I was definitely like a math science kid. I really love numbers. I remember like I would always get the newest edition of the Guinness Book of World Records because I just loved how people are able to like quantify these like human achievements. And that was always so fascinating to me. Additionally, like my parents were both software engineers themselves. So tech just felt sort of a big part of my life. It felt very natural. In college, I ended up studying computer science at the University of Washington. And I really enjoyed just sort of the puzzle piecing aspect of it. I think having the ability to like solve a problem with like an arsenal of tools is just really cool to me. So yeah, that was like a big sort of jumping off point for how I really got involved in technology. So after I graduated, I moved from Washington all the way to New York, where I worked at Google. And I was just sort of a standard software engineer working on things like Google Docs and Google Forms, Google Search for a little bit. And it was fun for in an aspect of like getting to have that problem solving feeling, but like, you know, 2 years in, I was like working on a dialogue box on Google Docs, and I was like, what am I doing like with my life? Like I enjoy like, you know, aspects of this, but just like what's this like deeper purpose in a way? And luckily, Google has this awesome program called google.org where they help embed you into a nonprofit. And it was one of their first cohorts for an AI for social good initiative. And I remember I got matched up with the Trevor Project, which I think like, you know, a lot of people know it's one of the like leading LGBTQ plus youth suicide prevention organizations. And we were building AI models that looked much different than the AI today, like no chat GPT around or anything, but like a very simple AI model to help support those youth. And I think that was a really just I don't know. I think that's probably the moment I'd say like my life changed. I think life is a collection of moments, but that's probably the singular one because it made me like understand sort of like this idea that technology can do like actively really good things. And then like at the same time, you know, another sort of like feeling of maybe otherness when I was younger was that I myself am part of like the LGBTQ community. I had come out quite a bit earlier, but I had had bad experiences with it. I had gotten hurt. So I had stopped opening up about it for like many years. And a lot of people didn't necessarily know that aspect about me. But that was the first time I really realized my own lived experience was like not something that I needed to suppress, but rather an actual tool and something that is informing technology that can help other people like me potentially. And that alignment, I think, really stayed with me. So the Trevor Project, it's a fixed term stint. It ended after 6 months. And a bit of a random detour, but I thought like, you know, I'd try out the entertainment industry for a little actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rewind. What? How did you get to there? What?
It's very, very unintuitive, I suppose. But I think like it was going back to, I had come back to my Google Docs team. And I remember I had gotten on this project, which is inserting like section breaks in Google Doc. And it was like an 8-month endeavor to do so. I'm not trying to like, Google engineers, all engineers, like, they're awesome, whatever you're building. But I just like could not bring myself to do it. And at the same time, like, obviously I had this really incredible impact experience, but it's interesting looking back now. I didn't necessarily put that into like words. And instead I had been like, I like this idea of like getting out there and putting myself out there. So like originally it was actually a lot of like, going to be in front of the camera type stuff. I almost got on a couple of reality shows, which was a fun fact, I guess. But then like what it actually sort of all came together full circle was what really helped me carve a niche in that industry was like my data analysis skills or pattern recognition skills. And it really brought me back to like, entertainment is something I enjoy consuming. And there still is like aspects, when you think about like how to optimize something for an audience, like there's analysis you can do and pattern recognition. And it's sort of like really instilled in me that like, I think this idea of science is embedded throughout our world, regardless of our industries. And I don't think I think on the other side, it also taught me a lot about how life isn't purely just science. Like, I'm not a robot saying everything can be boiled down to an equation, even though, that is, I guess, what I'm trying a little bit. But like, I think it really is a combination of like, that human aspect, that intuition, and sort of like validation through data or patterns, things like of that nature. Anyways, after a brief stint at BuzzFeed, which was where I was working, I started my MBA at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. It was a really interesting time because I started in the fall of 2022, which was right when ChatGPT first came out. Like I remember, like it was in the middle of the quarter too. And just like that shift all of a sudden where people are like, I could get it to do all my assignments was the biggest thing. And it was such a buzz around campus. It was mostly centered around like, how to optimize business processes and, what parts of business can be automated and optimized or more efficient. And I think it's, a very valuable thing. But at the same time, like, regardless of the AI piece of it all, like, I think I had also realized I felt a little bit different from my classmates in terms of like our worldview. And that's not necessarily to say anything negative about them. Like, I don't think theirs is inherently worse. It's just different. But I realized that for so many people, and it's probably my own bad for going to business school, like a lot of people are there to like optimize wealth accumulation. And that's what's important to them. And there's like a moral good association with your ability to do that. And for me, I thought it was the moment where I felt the most out of place in that sense, when I would understand how people were talking about it. And again, I want to like say everyone was kind, but it definitely felt out of place. Like a moment I really remember was in my AI for business class. Like this VC came in and he was talking about some type of healthcare AI investment he had made. And then one of my friends, like she's a med student, she raised her hand and she's like, well, isn't this going to make healthcare a lot more expensive for people? And the VC like took a pause and he's like, yeah, but I'm going to make a lot of money off it. And just seeing, yeah, I know. And seeing like all my classmates, just not all, but like so many of them like nod their heads in agreement. And, even the slogan of the school are things like change the world. But then a lot of people end up going in private equity, which I'm like, technically you're changing the world, but like what cost? And I think that sort of made me question, what I wanted to do with my life. And I remember thinking like, at the end of the day, like this experience at the Trevor Project was the moment where I felt the most fulfillment. And when I think about what I want to optimize for in my life, like, do I care about like making as much money as possible? Is that actually making me happy? I don't think so. I think it's like that feeling internally, and people get it from different reasons. But I realized for myself, it's around like applying things that I, not to like pat myself on the back, but things that I think I'm pretty good at in ways that can help people. So from then I went to Fast Forward, which is a tech nonprofit accelerator, similar to like Y Combinator, except they focus on nonprofits, and specifically nonprofits that use tech centrally to delivering impact, like Khan Academy or Wikipedia. And they had like seen a big influx in like AI powered nonprofits or AI native nonprofits. So they brought me on as sort of their AI lead. And that was like a really fun experience. I got to coach around like 50 different teams on like how
That's
they're
quite a lot of teams. That's quite a high number. That's awesome.
And it was like different extents in a way, but it was really cool, like getting to advise on their strategy and hearing from their lead engineers on how they're thinking about AI. in this specific lens of like, we're using it to help people and not harm people, because that line is like, incredibly thin.
Yeah.
And it was that like big moment of alignment, I'd say, where like things sort of came to heed, where it was like the social impact piece, the technology piece. In a way, the entertainment piece is like, I got to synthesize my learnings from like my bird's eye point of view. I got to share it with people, including foundations, and like help them with their funding patterns, which was really, really cool. And, also getting to help people who had their own lived experiences, which were different than mine, and like see their dreams and visions for helping their community and understanding like how to support them. So, it was a really fun year. But, I think inherently, just like working for any company, you're going to have to align with, you're going to have to do projects and tasks that are aligned with the company's vision. And I think they're doing awesome work. They're supporting a lot of nonprofits. But I also had my own sort of like ideas that had been inspired from it that are like, I think, maybe it's the business school in me, but I think like there's a lot of room for like impact investing. And I don't necessarily think I should limit myself to nonprofits and foundations. And at the same time, I think if I'm able to dedicate my time towards unpacking like frameworks or decision architectures, or as I mentioned in like my work now, like those are all aspects of it, but also like impact measurement with AI, like, and dive deep into those, I think that's something that I feel like can create an outsized impact, is my hope. And also it's just honestly just really fun to do, because it goes back to Guinness Book of World Records, I guess.
You light up when you talk about this. But do you know what, it's so wonderful and really refreshing to see, because, work in this space right now it's not easy. It's really, really hard right now, but you're talking about it with so much passion and enthusiasm. It genuinely is lovely to see. At what point though were you like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna found a company now, like this is the moment? Like, when did you know?
Yeah, I think it happened right after my first demo day with Fast Forward. So we had like gone through the process of having 10 teams go through our accelerator. It was such like a beautiful moment, seeing these founders like get up on stage and like share their vision. And I don't necessarily feel like I always have to be the center of attention or the person like propping myself up. But what I really admired about them was like they had an idea that they felt passionate about, and like having the constraints of being a tech company and a nonprofit and still just like going for it was like, I thought it was like badass. And like, I was like, I have my own ideas too. And obviously I have like security from this job, and they're allowing me to do like some of the stuff, which is awesome. But I was just like, at the end of the day, like when I look back on my life, do I want to regret not trying? Like I'm okay if I fail. Obviously that's not the ideal outcome, but I'd much rather regret trying and failing than not trying at all.
Which is honestly so true, but it's easier said than done, right? So
Yeah.
to actually make that, it's like a leap of faith. It's a leap of faith in yourself, but also what can be achieved. And it's amazing. So how long has it been? And talk about what projects that you've been working on.
Yeah. So it's been fairly recent, actually. So I left Fast Forward right around the beginning of August. So it's been like literally 2 months. But that being said, like I've gotten to do some pretty cool things. The first sort of like client I've been working with is this awesome nonprofit called Project Own. And they focus on Black wealth creation, specifically in the city of Baltimore in the US, which has pretty significant income disparities between racial groups, like often for systemic reasons. And what's really interesting about them is I'd met them a while earlier, and they were very anti-AI. They were like, AI in general, like, doesn't seem like it really fits our ethos. We're scared of all the very understandable risks. But after having conversations with them, we're now actually, like, I'm helping lead their product strategy on how they deploy an AI app to provide financial coaching for people who aren't able to access like their human coaches.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's awesome. And it's so much fun. They're an awesome team. Highly recommend checking them out. They're so like, I really appreciated how they're able to have their own morals and convictions, and they aren't shy about it, but they're also willing to like open up their points of view and like respond. And I think that's like ultimately what the sector needs. So it's something that the sector definitely needs. And it's been a really fun time. And it's like what really helped me with Fast Forward was it gave me an idea that like every organization obviously has like very unique aspects, but there's a somewhat like formulaic process towards deploying AI safely in certain contexts, and like the inner mechanisms may differ, but I think I'm realizing there are a lot of patterns towards deploying it. So that's like a big aspect. I think like more taking a step back of the types of stuff that impacts AI does. Like I said, we're doing philanthropic and impact investing, sort of like AI strategy support. Not necessarily how they can use AI themselves, though I do offer that. I've done some courses with M10 for that, but more so about like when they're funding AI projects, what are the things they should look for? I made this decision architecture called Practical, which is an acronym for the 9 sort of key dimensions of what I think are sort of like equity-centered AI solutions that are human-facing. And it provides like tests and all those cases. So I think there's been a big push towards deploying more philanthropic capital into the AI sector, but I think there's still a missing piece about like what's the best way to do so. So that's sort of the gap I'm trying to help solve.
Which is amazing, because I definitely, and we've got our 3rd iteration of our AI survey coming out very, very shortly. I want to say it's coming out in November. I know, oh my gosh, I don't want to get in trouble from our marketing team right now, but they are going to probably be very mad that I'm sharing this. But we've noticed that the adoption rates have increased, right? We're at a threshold where most not-for-profit orgs are using in some way, shape, or form, which is great. But I still think people have like this experimentation hat on right now, and that's not a bad thing. Like, we understand that you've all got to start somewhere, you've got to, but it's really interesting hearing you talk about this framework that can help people essentially use in a really safe way. Is that fair to say? I don't want to overstep the mark. I want to know more about the framework.
No. I'd love to share more. So it's exactly that. So it's around people that are specifically deploying AI to help like as a central way to deliver impact in a sense. And it's helping those engineering teams, product teams, whoever is responsible for that, understand exactly like how to ensure that's happening in a safe way. Because as you mentioned, I think some of the experimentation, or sometimes I call it like pilot purgatory, is...
I love that phrase. I'm going to borrow that phrase.
Yeah, please do. It's so centered around like, I know it can do really cool things, but I'm scared of unleashing it in the wild, because AI is such a shift from reactive technology to proactive technology. It's making decisions in a sense, it's making calls, especially as we move like towards agents. That's just going to keep increasing and increasing. So I think that's the part that understandably makes people uneasy. So this framework is like, half technical strategy, half like, kind of business strategy around these are the things that companies should focus on at the beginning that allows safe, scalable deployments to deliver AI for impact.
So Addie, I know hopefully we'll have some listeners out there that are like, oh my gosh, like, how do I do this? They can reach out to you if anyone wants to, they want more information, like reach out to us here at 3-Sided Cube and we can direct you to Addie. Obviously, we'll make sure that we're not throwing everyone at you, Addie, but it's, I guess they can like reach out to you and I guess have a conversation with you to understand how they might be able to work with you, or I guess best understand what the next step should be in terms of them on their AI journey, I guess.
Absolutely. Like, I think I love talking to people in the impact space, like all type, like people who work at foundations, people who work at giant nonprofits, like, a college kid who's thinking about starting like a small thing at their campus, like any and all the above. Like, I think AI, what it's so cool about it is that it really like has the ability to work for everyone in different ways. It's such like a generalist tool in a sense. And I myself like am just so passionate about like even learning from other people, like how they're thinking about it. And like, I think the best solutions are really the ones that have like multiple points of view and perspectives, and understanding their context and applying like my experience together, I'm hopeful like can deliver the impact, which is the whole reason I'm doing this.
Oh my gosh, I love the positive. Like, I honestly, I love it. It's really infectious, because so often, especially talking about AI, and it is like everyone is talking about it right now. And what I find is you have people there's a lot of extremes. You have people that are like massively pro or massively against, but it's almost like or certainly what it feels like to me is what's missing is this grounded piece in the middle of understanding what the benefits are, but also what the drawbacks and what the considerations need to be, so that we can use and harness it for the best possible way. I don't know. I don't know if that's making any sense.
No. That resonates with me a lot. And I think like it's always been a thing I've been cognizant of, where I think a lot of people, when they first meet me or they hear me speak, they assume I'm like explicitly pro AI. And like the truth is, I think I'm like pro impact, and I view AI as an effective tool to do so. But there are like very important limitations to acknowledge. I've actually, on the side, as a side project, me and my friend have started an event series called Better Worlds AI, where we talk about sort of like these human concerns around it. Like we just had a panel around the environmental like implications of AI. We're going to have one around like the mental health applications. And I think for AI to be a vehicle of change, the potential is incredible. But at the same time, like leading with the limitations and designing around the limitations is, table stakes in order for that, for AI to be able to do so.
It's interesting hearing you talk about those events. If people wanted more information, Addie, where should they go to for this?
Yeah,
Because just you talk about like the mental health side, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, yeah. It feels like the world's moving at 1,000,000 miles per hour and I can't keep up. And I know I'm not alone. Like a lot of people feel like that right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like they can always reach out to me. We have a LinkedIn page, Better Worlds AI, where we post about the events. I think it all really started because I live in San Francisco. I go to a bunch of like events, and it's always centered around like, how it can make so much money and how it's like allowing people to have 100 million ARR with a lean team and things like that. And I'm like, okay, but like at the end of the day, like as an individual, how are you being affected? And you see these stories around people who have, developed like parasocial relationships with their AI, or like an overt dependency, things like that. And what this event series does, and obviously any listeners, if you think you can contribute, we'd love to hear from you, because we take people who aren't necessarily in the AI world. Like we have like an environmental justice advocate. We might get like a psychologist coming in alongside some technologists to have like a sort of like have these different points of view sort of coalesce around like, a solution of sorts, like around like what's the safe way to do it. Because I think it's also unreasonable to be like, AI is on the path to being like, AI is here to stay in some capacity, and we have to work around it in a sense. So understanding what we're working with is incredibly important.
Yeah, it really is. Talking about the environmental impacts, but also the mental health impacts, two very topical themes right now I'm seeing coming off, because I think the world is moving so quickly, and there are so many, it feels like a lot in all areas of people's lives, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whatever. Like, there's just a lot going on, and to try and stay relevant or up to speed or whatever, it's extremely hard to do so. But there's a lot of stuff that people don't realize or don't know, like like let's say the environmental side of everything that's going on with AI. I know some stuff, but I wouldn't consider myself massively educated in this space. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be some really damning and horrific sides of it. And I think it's balance, right? It's understanding that side as well as understanding like what could be good out of it as well. It's really, I don't know, it just feels really hard right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough because I think like, and I don't necessarily know if this is exactly what resonates with you, but at least for me, like I'm like the aspect of it is like the potential change it can bring is so incredible, but at the same time, it's so scary. But like I think of something like the internet, like a lot of people say that was like the last like technological revolution. Like it's done so many incredible things, and like like almost every nonprofit, any social enterprise org has some like interaction with the web and that interconnectivity that it brings. At the same time, we also know that it's brought about some really horrible things, and I think that's where like that nuance comes in, where, as we said, like AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And it's almost impossible to keep up with that pace of development, as you talk about, especially as like these major companies have this black box aspect where they aren't necessarily sharing everything. Like even the environmental discussion, like, trying to like research numbers and things like that. It's all like very under wraps.
And no one wants to talk about stuff. So this is what we found when we were, and we still do quite a lot of webinars in this space. And when we first did, I didn't want to say the first iteration of our survey that went out to thousands of not-for-profits. no one wanted to complete it because no one wanted to be vocal or share what they were doing in the space. We're now in the third iteration. We're like 2.5 years in now, and a lot more people are, but again, they're still very closed. But when you actually drill down and you reach out to those and you ask them to speak publicly, it's like, no.
Really?
And like they don't want to, like some will. You've
Sure.
got a handful that will, but you still have a lot of people that are very, very nervous to talk about things publicly because, you know, it's intimidating. They're scared. You know, are they going to get picked apart because they're saying, oh, they're going to do something wrong? Like, that's a really hard situation to be in. And something that's always struck me in the not-for-profit space is everyone has always been really vocal and really honest, and they like share insights and learnings because they understand budgets can only go so far. So, you know, collectively people can go further together than they can, you know, competitively, let's say.
Absolutely.
I do think it's increasingly hard for not-for-profits, especially right now, because I don't see as much, not transparency, I think it's more visibility of like what people are specifically doing and like honestly like what mistakes people have made and what they've learned from those mistakes so that the other not-for-profits don't make the same mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's such a interesting thing. Like I feel like AI has almost like a marketing issue where it is like inherently such a controversial technology, and like you can have stats that back it up, and it's something I obviously encourage my teams that I help assist to do, like, you know, have like a human baseline measure of like that you can tie to a number and then show like how AI is at that level or like improving on that level. But at the same time, it's almost like that perception where, you know, if a human doctor gives you a misdiagnosis, for example, like I think we as people, obviously that would be upsetting, but like as people, we've accepted that that's like an acceptable cost. But if an AI does it, even at like the same rate or even a less rate, that's all of a sudden like a much more difficult thing for people to rationalize with. And I think that's like, I assume that maybe contributes to that hesitancy.
Definitely. Now, something that I found quite interesting is if you built an AI policy builder.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that, because I will say, and this was maybe a couple of years ago now, we, in a similar way, we do round tables and they're they're closed, it's invite only. And it was really interesting, the number of not-for-profits back then that just did not have a policy. They didn't know what to include, what not to include. This piqued my ear. I was like, come on, like talk to us about this policy builder that you have.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'll tell you the story of how it came about. It actually happened at Fast Forward. So when I first got there, one of like my first tasks was we want to use AI ourselves for our own operations. Addie, can you help us make an AI policy? So it was a very like kind of simple thing. Like I researched a little bit and typed up a Google Doc. All went pretty smooth. But again, Fast Forward is really focused on helping support the nonprofit sector. And at the same time, I was reading a lot about like this idea of secret cyborgs. Essentially, like, you know, like how you've mentioned, like an organization may be hesitant to say like I use AI, or maybe even the CEO or just primary decision maker. But it's a tool that a lot of people have at their disposal. You know, they're like, I think it was a Stanford Social Innovation Review article, the SSIR series. They had talked about how people at a variety of organizations, like staff members, are still using AI, but they feel hesitant to share about it, which just seemed so counterintuitive to me because I'm like, one, that's less safe than if like you were open about it. And two, you know, you yourself are benefiting from this. Your whole organization could hypothetically benefit from it. So I think what an AI policy is helpful for is it gives like, you know, very clear direction on using AI and like how to do it again safely. Around those aspects. And I think like as I was going through my research for our own AI policy, I had seen that there were so many different resources out there that actually ended up kind of like coalescing around similar concepts, things around like accountability of decisions or like what to do with sensitive data. And the implementation pieces were obviously a little bit different based off the organizational context. Like an organization working with kids will need stricter data privacy than a climate organization. But at the same time, like those concepts seem fairly consistent. And as I was sort of like, you know, getting my bearings in the AI world, I was like, this seems actually very meta sense, like a perfect use case for AI, where, you know, there's a degree of pattern recognition and ability to synthesize that. And at the same time, the ability to customize it towards a certain context. So With AI, we built this AI policy builder that like asks people questions around like, how big is your org? What's your focus? What types of people do you use? It also gives them options. And like, so, you might not necessarily need to think about like what your data retention policy is off the top of your head, because you may not necessarily know that, especially if you're a resource strapped org. And it also has like an educational aspect where if something doesn't make sense, you can ask it a question and it'll help clarify. And the idea is it gives you a starter AI policy that you should definitely review yourself. Like that's a big thing. We always talk about with AI, review outputs. But the idea is like instead of having, a resource strapped team of 3 people who are at capacity trying to do 20 different things, also spend then like, 5-6 hours researching what an AI policy even is and entails, can now like have a really streamlined process where they don't need to know all the like inner workings or nuances necessarily, but it's still educating them enough so that they can feel confident about deploying it in their own.
So if someone is listening and they're like, oh my gosh, how do I get my hands on the AI policy builder? Where do they go, Addie?
Yeah, they should go to Fast Forward's website. The Fast Forward website's awesome. They have a lot of great stuff. Like they have a playbook, everything like that. But I believe it's under their tools section, they have an AI policy builder free to use for anyone. Last I checked when I was still there, I think it had been used like 10,000 messages or so had been exchanged through it. So like I'm hopeful that it's like helped organizations all across the world at least get started with an AI policy.
And that's amazing. Put the foundations in place, because without question, I certainly now like these policies, I think there's a lot of internal policies that are going to need to get reviewed more often than they perhaps once did. But if you haven't got one, go in there, go get your policy, go start with the foundation, and then it can be reviewed every few months, whether it's every quarter, every 6 months, annually, whatever it is. Start with something, because it's super important to get those rails in place to help guide the usage throughout the organization.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool to be part of that and to do that. So I think it was earlier on you mentioned experimenting with AI to measure social ROI. How can technology translate humans, like real human stories, into credible data without losing that nuance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a tricky problem to think through. And in a way, like goes back to my entertainment story, where that moment of realizing like data and narrative, or data and intuition, in a sense, maybe this isn't necessarily intuition, but at least like data and like the humanity, like really like goes hand in hand, is important. And in a way, like when I am trying to like quantify impact, or honestly, like my original idea was maybe I can make like a library that people just like, plug into their code base and it's tracking how much help it's making. But pretty quickly, I realized that's not necessarily feasible, because there is such a big variance. I think like it really started because my hot take is I'm not a big fan of like how people track impact generally, or how people report that as a metric, because I think it's such a nebulous word. Like if
So it's just my massive bugbear. It's like, what is impact?
Yeah, exactly.
Because quite often people are measuring outcomes, but not impact.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, come on, talk, Addie. So this is great. I can talk about this for hours.
Yeah. No, exactly. Because I'm like, if I, which is obviously an important thing, but if I like improve carbon emissions, could I say that I've impacted 8 billion people in the world because I've helped the air, versus like, and that's obviously an extreme example, but still, like, are you optimizing for how many people use your app, whether they use it for 5 minutes or for, 5 months, or what's the impact of it all? So in a way, like I was just like, maybe I want to like redefine how, or standardize at least a process for understanding impact, to sort of answer your original question around like what my sort of like thesis on investment of ROI, social return on investment, is giving people the frameworks and strategies in order to understand like what types of impact or outcomes they're specifically looking for. And I think what's really critical about AI in particular is you should be defining those upfront, because designing a tool around like, I think a big issue with AI is sometimes people have a solution and they're looking for the right problem to solve. And that backwards nature can obviously cause a lot of problems. But instead, if you're saying something like, I want to help improve, like, I want to help improve children's test scores or whatnot, and you have a very specific number in mind of like, I want to see a 15% increase. I don't know, just sort of throwing out numbers. Yeah. Defining those upfront is really necessary. And I think that deals with a lot of like that baseline gathering. So I think it still can be quantified in a sense. I just don't necessarily think you can necessarily compare like one person's output to another and say it's inherently more valuable. The idea is like, I'll go to these foundations, impact investing firms, say, this is how you should be, in addition to like when you're funding these projects, these are how you should be measuring the outcomes or the impact that come from it. So essentially like the core metric I have, just reading my notes, but it's called the effective human-centered impact, or EHI. And in very simplest terms, it's how much human good did the AI produce. And it's a product of the amount of people you've helped, the average benefit, whatever that may look like, the duration of the benefit, but also adjustments for things like, retention, like displacement. There's a lot of, I think you have to subtract the costs of harm, which are like obviously extremely steep in the social sector, and also things like attribution, where, sometimes impact can occur because of AI, sometimes it could occur because of coincidence or something else in your system. So you want to understand what the AI piece does. So it's a pretty like complicated formula in theory, but the idea is like when I go to these organizations, I can be like, okay, to understand like, how many people you've helped, this is like a type of survey you should run at the beginning. This is the type of things you should be tracking in your org. So it's like almost a strategic way to come to a numerical conclusion.
Yeah, so you've got a measure of success that you can hat on and be like, that's the goal, that's the true measure of success. It's really interesting because just this morning I was having a conversation with a couple of people, and they were being led by the technology and the solution rather than the problem.
Yeah.
I was trying to focus the attention on, but what is the problem?
Yeah.
Only by having focus on that are we going to be able to, and understanding what good looks like. So understanding that measure of success, are we going to be able to solve that problem? And I think what's happening, I'm seeing it more and more, and I don't feel alarmed by it. Maybe I should. I don't know if I'm just seeing this too often, but I feel like now with the rate of the technology change that I'm seeing it more and more. And I think maybe it's a natural part of the Gartner hype cycle, right? You hear all this hype and everything's all good, and then you get to the trough of disillusionment and you're like, oh God. And then it goes up, and that's when you start finding the real good, really strong use cases for that particular piece of technology. I'm not saying where we are on the hype cycle. AI's been around for many, many years.
Sure.
But there's just a lot more hype. There's just a lot more noise around it now, is what I would say. And I think people get distracted and they're focusing too much on solutions and stuff that you can do rather than bringing it back to the problem, which is a really important point that you made, Addie.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's interesting how many, like exactly what you're saying. Like, I think like that shift in how people are viewing AI is like, we need to use it. And sometimes I think like maybe it's like pressure from even funders where they're like, oh, like I need to get money and they're asking specifically for an AI grant. But what's interesting about AI is that like it's a very complicated tool and it's pretty expensive to run at scale and safely. So actually the first thing I always recommend people do before they even use AI is to do a needs assessment and evaluate any other piece of technology that can actually accomplish the same thing easier and cheaper. And the most effective AI solutions are like when you go through that whole needs assessment and you realize like AI is the one way to deliver this impact, or the best way to deliver it. Like an example with an org I worked with was called Vigilant, and they were helping people in rural India sort of like detect early stage blindness, and that would require much more human doctors than there's capacity for, especially to travel and everything. But like to have a diagnosis tool like AI's machine learning was a very natural solution. So again, like the whole company started around like, I want to help people with this problem, and they could like they discovered that AI was the right solution,
which is amazing. Like that's an organic, like that's a real strong use case for it. When you again start with the problem and then work from the problem onwards. Right. So we've talked a lot about like the now and what's going on right now, but what's the next big thing in tech for good? Like what's coming up?
Yeah.
Big question for you, Addie.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, like, I think that, well, maybe I have two answers, kind of like a little bit of a doomer answer, if you will. But I actually, it's kind of building off what you had said earlier, where will put a stake in the ground and say, like, I think we're about to see this AI bubble pop in a sense. And I think the not-for-profit sector often sort of follows, and not all the time, but like at times, like follows patterns of the for-profit sector, where like so much money is getting invested in these VCs. And now we're sort of seeing that like a lot of those returns aren't necessarily uh, hitting the same as expected. But to your point, I think what's going to happen is that it's going to identify really strong use cases about like what exactly like AI is good at and what it can do. So my sort of like hunch in terms of like that answer is I think that we're going to have a lot more in-depth AI integrations, but I think people are going to be much more mindful about how they're being deployed necessarily. Uh, and at the same time, I think for the operational side or like business execution side, we're going to see a lot more of that get embedded for like small things like grant writing. Like I think people are soon, they already have been, obviously the survey, like as people are using it more and more, but like it's just an opportunity cost. You're leaving opportunity on the table if you aren't using it in some capacity. So I imagine like there will be more robust tools. I think in a very more kind of like future technological sense, in the short term, I think like agents are going to become a much bigger force in the AI for social good space, specifically because I think capacity is such an issue for not-for-profits oftentimes. And like if you have an agent that can like operate within a certain context window to do very specific tasks, I think that has like really high potential. The obvious caveat with that is like it's a bit nerve-wracking to like let an agent out, but that's where I think, as we also develop our own understanding of agents, like having a very tightly controlled repetitive workflow that it can operate in, people that build those, and it's not the hardest thing to build with these low code tools, those could have a big presence. And then like even like, looking a little bit further, I think, in 10 years, we could see a lot of like AI integration with robotics. And I think that might have like another really big transformational impact on service delivery, because again, right now, like so much of social impact is centered around the opposite of like, my business school education is always about like, well, how do you get the easiest to reach customer, the lowest like customer acquisition cost? Whereas not-for-profits, a lot of the time you're looking for the hardest to reach users, maybe different areas, things like that. So one, I think there will be better interconnectivity to reach those users, but two, I also wonder if like, robotics can like be a way to help deliver impact in the long.
Which is amazing. Oh my God, when you said 10 years, I was like, I can't even think of 2 or 3 years, let alone 10 years.
Yeah.
It is interesting hearing you talk about the agents, and I'm seeing a lot more, and I'm not gonna name names, maybe I will in the notes, I can't remember, but there was a really awesome org that they'd created an agent to basically to help out of hours, like it would help them scale like out of hours services and stuff, and it was really quite interesting. But they went in with like an experimental hat on of what you could and should and shouldn't do, and then they learned quite a lot of lessons, they got quite a lot of insight, and then they scaled in what I would describe like a really much more considered way, because they had those learnings and insights. They understood that they were going to make mistakes and that stuff was, there's bad stuff that sometimes happens, but you have to learn from that to push that forward in order to scale, so that you can help more people. And I think that was really quite interesting. Like I still can't get over thinking about the robotics piece in the agents. Like that feels like another level right now.
And I think I'll also just give the caveat that I'm also of the opinion that people that say they know something is going to happen for sure with AI, like more than a couple of years out, like I think those are the people you should trust the least in a sense, because no one actually knows. But I just have like, I think there's so much potential for that. And I think, even just like the hype cycle of it all, like where it trajects, like I think it seems like a natural progression to me, but honestly, who knows?
So true. And Addie, look, thank you so much for your time. And if anyone wants to reach out to Addie, the best place to reach out to you, Addie, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can always add me on LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn girl, but also would love for you to check out my website. It's impactsai.io. You can email me at addie@impactsai.io. And yeah, I really would love to talk to anyone interested in the space. it's my favorite part is just having conversations. So yeah, just really appreciate you again also for the opportunity. This was so fun. And I love your insights on it too. I feel like, hearing about the surveys and everything has taught me a lot.
This has been brilliant. Thank you so much, Addie.